As I was thinking about last week, and last week was a mess. And one of the things that made it a mess, I thought, as I was trying to lead it, you weren't here, right?
No,
oh boy, you missed a good one. And this is, and I'm going to try to avoid it this week. One of the issues with Paul, and I've talked about this before, is Paul is a plotter. And he goes over and over and over, and that's good that it's so detailed. But one of the things that can kind of throw us off is if we try to take it sort of verse by verse, because he's really repetitive. And sometimes and he's also dictating this. Sometimes his points aren't concise and clear. And I think that's kind of what we ran into a little bit last week, or as I look back at how I kind of managed the discussion. I think we got too gummed up with some of the details, and I'm going to try to avoid doing that with some of the stuff we're looking at today, because I'm going to tell you, as I was working on it, he goes off on a diversion that I'm looking at and I'm saying, what the heck is he doing? And then when you kind of take a step back from it and say, okay, I can get these 25, 30 verses. Okay, I can see if I take them all together, that's what he's trying to do. But if you try to go individually, you're saying, boom, 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 boom. I don't see any relationship here. But if you kind of look at it in the context and the totality, well, it kind of makes sense. That's one of the things that makes Paul really difficult, that he covers things so minutely, it becomes a little bit challenging. And therefore, sometimes I think it's important to take a step back and say, what is the big picture? What is his point in this? He's asked 15 questions. Why? What do they all have to do? How are they all dealing with the same? Rather than going through them individual, what does each one mean? I'm not sure that's as important as what do they all mean if you take them together. Anyway, that's what I'm going to try to do today. We're going to try to do so that we don't get gummed up in all these trying to find meaning in every single verse. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and church in Corinth has a fundamental problem. And what is the fundamental problem in Corinth that we no longer have nowadays?
Too many leaders.
Okay, you got too many leaders. Well, at the very least, you've got two leaders that are pulling the church apart. He even mentions four, one of which is Jesus. That has become a little group within the church, and it's really ripping the church apart. And why is that a problem? Why is it a problem that the church is being torn apart by the factions? I'm follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas, I follow Jesus. What's the problem when that's happening in the church? What's the issue?
They're divided.
Okay, good. They become really divided. And what's the problem when churches become divided?
They split apart.
Okay,
eventually.
they eventually split apart, which is bad. What else?
There's friction.
There's friction all the time. Before they split apart, you got friction. And why are both of those a problem? In other words, what's the fundamental problem when churches are divided, they're feeling frictions, they're on the verge of breaking apart? Why is that a problem? Why isn't it just, well, let them divide. If they don't like each other, just go their own way. Now you got two churches. The old joke. Guy pulls into a small town, asks a gas station attendant, is there a church around here? And he says, yeah, we've got three. We had two, but they merged. And because churches, if you don't like them, go someplace else. That's almost the philosophy we work with. Well, if you have a problem with somebody in the church, just go somewhere else. Geez, we got one all over the place. Throw a dart, you may hit a church. That's not a big deal. Well, for Paul it is a big deal. Why would it be a big deal? Why wouldn't he just say, well, you know what you need? The Apollos people, just form your own congregation. And the Paul people, form your own congregation. And the Cephas people, find your own. And we'll all work together. But he doesn't say that. Why? What does Paul see as the problem with everything you all said? The frictions, the divisions, the separation that's about to occur. Why is that an issue that Paul has to address?
You won't learn anything or grow.
Good. Outstanding. And I think that's the key. Because when Paul looks at not only this church, but all churches, the church isn't there so that you can kind of focus inside. So that you can feel good about yourself. But the church is there so that you can reach out. The church is there so you can reach out to others. And what divisions do, what do the divisions end up doing? Which is really kind of interesting. It just kind of hit me when I asked the question. What do divisions do to churches? In an ironic way.
Stay in their own group.
Yes! Divisions by themselves force churches to focus inside, right? You can't do any outreach if you're focused on divisions on the inside. All your attention is inside, right? And Paul says, that's a problem. Now, since Paul sees this as a problem, he's going to deal with the divisions first. And how does he kind of deal with these divisions? What does he say about and it seems as though there are two that he really focuses on, between himself and the followers of Paul and the followers of this guy named Apollos. How does Paul kind of deal with those divisions, that division that's splitting the Corinthian church? What does he offer the Corinthians that may help them overcome these divisions? What should be the focus of the church that they have lost in fighting over? Well, Apollos. I follow Apollos. Boy, he's a smart guy. Well, I follow Paul. He was here. He was an important man. What have they lost sight of?
God.
They've lost sight of God, right? Now, they're a Christian church, right? What in particular about God, or maybe more particular about Christ, that they've lost sight of? What about Christ have they forgotten as they do this internal division?
His message was to spread the word.
Okay, messages and remember he says the core of the message, and this is good Paul stuff. The core of the message is the cross. Is the cross. You've lost the cross, right? And you're dividing over other things. And when you get right down to it, when you think about the cross, which is really tied to God, because you only see meaning on the cross because of God. Because the world sees the cross as ridiculous, as stupid. The world sees the cross as stupid. It's a big fat waste of time. Following a person that was executed. Like in our modern society, somebody that gets a lethal injection. Why are you following him? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. There's no nobility in that. And other people see it as blasphemy. It's a blasphemous thing. It must show he's a horrible person. And yet that becomes your focus. And Paul says you've lost sight of that. You've also lost sight of, and again, getting into this growth business, you've lost sight of what Apollos and I what we've been doing. And what does he say? He and Apollos have done in the Corinthian church. What does Paul say he and Apollos have done?
Laid a foundation.
Okay, who's laid a foundation?
Jesus, but...
Well, Jesus is the foundation,
Yes, okay.
right? But who laid it?
Peter.
Not Peter.
Paul.
Paul laid, remember he said, and he uses 3 different images, right? Analogies, that's the second one. I laid the foundation. What did Apollos do?
Built the wall.
He built the walls. And now he's a little harsh on Apollos. The walls are going to be the thing judged. Not the foundation, but the walls. Because he's building a temple, and when you judge the quality of a building, is how well it stands up. And, in storms and foundations usually don't get shaken in a storm. They're there. But the walls can come down. So you judge based on that. So I was the one that laid the foundation. Apollos built the walls, right? But it's the temple that's important. It's what we built that's important, not which one is more important. Although I think Paul would say the foundation is. But that shouldn't be your focus. It should be on the temple where the Spirit dwells. He uses an agricultural example too, doesn't he? What does he say about agriculture? What did he do? Yes, I planted. What did Apollos do?
Water.
Apollos watered. God raised it. God made it grow. So you've lost sight. Look, you follow something that's ridiculous in the eyes of the world, which is the cross. And you've forgotten that Apollos and I are working together. That we were working together. Whether he knows it or not, we were working together. I was planting the seed, which is necessary, but he watered it, which is necessary. But God gave the growth. I laid the foundation, he built the walls, but what's important is the temple that was constructed, because the temple has the Holy Spirit. And that's what you've lost in dividing. That's what you've lost. You've lost your purpose to be something that grows. You're in this world. You've lost your purpose. You're supposed to be a temple, what contains the Spirit. You've lost focus of that by dividing. Okay? Now, he says that the divisions, and he's pushing, all of this is related. The divisions they're facing aren't just, broad about teaching. Last week, what was the big division that he was dealing with last time? Or maybe it was a week before. What was an issue that he'd heard about?
That man doing,
Yeah, the guy was with his stepmother.
it doesn't say stepmother, does it?
Well, father's wife. He was with his father's
It
wife.
does?
Yeah, it says father's wife. Yeah. And he says, you're doing that, right? You're also doing something else that's a problem that he's heard about. Christians are suing one another and using the secular courts to sue one another. What's the problem?
They're pagans.
Yeah, the pagans. The Christians are going to pagans for justice. Christians are doing something the pagans think are disgusting, but they're also doing something that denies that they have any sense of truth, that they can be fair. You got to go to a pagan judge to get justice, while doing something that the pagan judge thinks is disgusting. Lord have mercy. What has the church lost sight of?
The Holy Spirit.
They've lost sight of the Holy Spirit. They've lost sight of certainly the Holy Spirit that dwells in this building that's been built. What else have they lost sight of? Yeah, got to use the right preposition. What else have they lost sight of?
Their purpose.
They've lost sight of their purpose. They've lost sight of the Spirit that's in them. They've lost sight of their confession, which is cross-centered, and they've lost sight of their purpose. And their purpose is to be growing in this field that's the world, to be the place where the Spirit dwells. That's what they've lost. And he really he continues that. And we almost have to keep that in mind as we listen to what he says. Because even if he's not explicit, he's constantly, I think, going back to that idea that you as a community have a role to play. You have a purpose. And that's what you've lost by dividing up and doing things that are contrary to what you should be doing. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about what? What was the topic last week?
Sex.
Marriage.
Sex and marriage.
Sex and marriage.
Sex and marriage. That's what it was all about, right? What if you look at all that, aren't you, it's a shame you missed
Missed
it.
all that.
Yeah.
It is.
I mean, we had diagrams and everything.
Did you?
Oh, yeah, it was good.
Was Elaine here last week?
No, she wasn't.
Oh, I
No.
thought she was. I said,
No,
why
she'd have
didn't
told you if she had been. She'd have given you a call.
That's what I mean, why didn't I know?
That's exactly right.
Connecticut, they'll be back.
If you take that whole business about marriage and conjugal rights and, whether it's good to be married or whether it's good to be single and on and on and on. What's his point that maybe last week we never got to? In all that stuff, what's based on what he's already written, what was his point?
That you obey your vows when you get married.
Okay, then why? Why do you obey your vows? Why is obeying your vows so stupid important?
Just because it is.
Why? Yeah, but why?
Because God said so.
Yeah.
Well, because God said, well, sure, but why is that important that you do it? Remember, what is Paul's purpose? One of the things, and we're going to see it here with food, that gets really tricky, is Paul won't say, well, God said it, you better do it. Why will Paul not say, well, if it says it, you better do it? Why won't Paul say that? God said to be circumcised. You need to get circumcised. Why won't he do that? What becomes the problem for Paul if he says, well, it says it, go to it? He's got to have another reason for it. And we're going to see it here with eating food off to idols.
Well, because Jesus came to fulfill the law, so the law was fulfilled, and now we need to.
Right? What is our relationship with the law? Again, for Paul.
It's not of God, it's the laws are man's laws.
Okay, we've got human beings involved. So the law, even the law that's in the Old Testament, was given for human beings because human beings needed some kind of direction. They just weren't arbitrary rules that God thought up on a day. Why don't I make this a law? All of them have a reason. What?
Because he doesn't want you to focus on the law, he wants you to focus on God and the Holy Spirit.
And again, the cross. When Jesus died on the cross, what happened to us with respect to the law?
We are free.
We are free. Why are we free?
Because Jesus
Because
paid
our
the
sins,
price.
our sins are forgiven. So
The price paid, sins are forgiven. The law applies to what kind of people? Living people. People who are alive. When Jesus died on the cross, who died?
We did.
We did. And that's what Paul says. And that's why the cross is so radical. When Jesus died on a cross, remember he says this, now he doesn't say it in Corinthians, but he says it in Romans. When Jesus died on a cross, we died too. And sin only affects living people. And since sin only affects living people, the law, which kind of restrains sin, keeps us from doing crazy things, the law only applies to living people. The law doesn't apply. When you're dead, you don't have to follow the law anymore. Right? I mean, that's kind of stupid to say, well, if you're in a casket, getting a ticket because the hearse was going too fast and broke the law. The law doesn't apply to you anymore. Sin doesn't apply to you anymore. You are now free. So Paul is never going to say, you're not going to see Paul say, well, God said it, you better do it. Because that would mean what? We're not free. We're bound to law, right? So there's got to be another reason to do it. There's got to be another reason why we should keep it other than it just says it. And I think that's what becomes really important with marriage, and it's going to be really important in what we're looking at today. if the church is going to function as the place where the Spirit dwells, if the church is going to be the mouthpiece that announces Jesus in the world, you can't go nuts. You can't be living in a way that the world thinks is wrong, because you're not going to have a witness in that world anymore. Nobody's going to listen to you if you're not obeying the law, not because you got to or you'll go to hell. You're not going to be able to do your job. If the world looks at you and says, "What the heck are you doing with respect to marriage?" This is what married people do. If you're not doing that, then you're not going to be able to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in the world. And I think for Paul, that becomes really, really key. If you're divided, you can't do it. If you're not at least living in a way that the world respects, you're not going to be able to convey the gospel. If you don't care about that, then you're not going to do what you've been called to do. And I think that's really important in looking at Paul. And I think this whole business about, because he talks a lot about the marriage, not just about relationship between husbands and wives, because he goes into, is it better to be single or is it better to be married? And what's the point? What is the point when he talks about, is it better to be single or married? He doesn't give a law, does he? What does he say? You remember what do you think? Without even looking at it, what do you think he would say? If he's not going to be grounded in, well, this is what you're told to do. You got to get married. If he's not going to go there, because that's law, how do you think he's going to deal with whether you should be married or not?
It's your choice.
It's your choice. And how do I make that choice? Here I am, a single man. How do I choose whether I be married or not?
Whether I can have self-control or not.
Yes. I have to look inside myself. Well, let me look at the law. Let me find the law that says, thou shalt get married. Ain't there. Paul says, doesn't matter. The question is, can you do your job as a Christian? Can you focus on God as a single person? If you can, great. You don't have to worry about a husband or wife. You'll have a lot more free time. Go for it. But if you can't focus because other things get in the way, then what should you do? You should get married. If it's going to lead you to do things that even society, it's contrary to what society is saying, get married. It's not a question of law. It's a question of, how do I do what God has called me to do? How can I do it effectively? Does that make sense?
It's confusing, because then if there wasn't marriage and there weren't children to continue on the Word of God, doesn't God want people to have children and continue?
What do you think Paul would say to that? What do you think Paul, if you ask Paul that, because that's a great question, how do you think Paul would respond?
He'd probably say it was up to you.
He probably would say it's up to you. What do you think Paul would recognize? That I think he even suggests in what he writes about marriage. That most people are not going to be able to focus on God and be single.
And be single.
That most people are not going to be, because he's already talked about, human drives. That most people are not going to be able to live a celibate life. That's the way it is. So I think he would say, something? Good question, Janet. I think there'd be enough people who will say, I can't focus without a spouse. That'll take care of itself.
But you can go clear back to Adam and Eve, God created man and woman,
Right.
woman for man.
Right.
So weren't men and women supposed to be?
Oh yeah, but I think Paul would
supposed to be together.
Absolutely. I think yeah, that's certainly not a sin. But he'd say if you can focus your attention, do what God wants you to do it. If you can do that and be single, do it. Well, he does say that, and because he says it about himself, that I'm able to do that. I don't have those same drives now. It's interesting that he sort of pushes it back to the individual. You got to look at yourself. But I think he'd probably say, I think that's a good question. I think he'd probably say, based on what he's written, there's enough people. If there's enough people that aren't going to be able to maintain a focus without being married. But it's not a law either way. I think. One of the things, though, he isn't going to say, you got to get married and have kids. Because then we're back into law. And Paul's really careful about that. And we got the same thing going on in this what we're looking at today. When we move into chapter 8, he tells the issue right at the beginning.
Food.
What is it is food.
For idols. Sacrifice to idols.
Food, sacrifice idols. Now we ran into that in Acts, right? What was the thing about it in Acts? Food, sacrifice to idols.
Pure and impure food.
Yes, Acts talks about that. Remember when they had the Apostolic Council, 14th chapter of Acts? They came to the conclusion that you didn't have to be circumcised, people didn't have to be circumcised, but 4 rules.
Yeah.
And one of them was,
Food.
you couldn't eat food offered to idols, right? So evidently that was a big deal. Well, why would that be a big deal? Why would that be a big deal in the early church? Food offered to idols. I mean, it's not an issue for us at all. Mm-mm. Not even a little bit. I don't even know where you'd buy food offered to idols. I don't think they have it in Kmart. Oh, Kmart, thank you very much. That shows how old I am.
I'm really dated.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. At least I didn't say Zayre's.
Yeah.
Why would that be an issue? Food offered to idols.
It would be almost like you were worshiping an idol by eating what was offered to
Okay, it'd be like if you were worshiping. What might you assume, or what might somebody assume about the food itself if it was offered to an idol?
It'd be impure.
It'd be impure. Why would it be impure?
Because it was sacrificed.
Because it was sacrificed to a false god, right? So it makes the meat kind of tainted, makes the meat bad. Now, what kind of person would be most concerned about that? What kind of person would really be concerned about whether or not this meat is offered, or this food, meat in particular, because that's usually what you're talking about. What kind of person would be?
Jews?
Well, Jews certainly would. They don't want to be eating meat that's been offered to idols. They also don't want to eat meat that has blood in it, because that's not kosher. That would be terrible. And that's why in Romans a lot of Jewish Christians are eating only vegetables, because they can't be sure that the meat, whether meat has been drained of the blood. So on the safe side, I'll only eat vegetables. Who else would be? So Jews certainly would be. Who else would be concerned about whether meat is offered to idol?
Well, anybody in the church would be concerned because they don't want there to be any idols.
Okay, why might a Gentile be concerned? A former pagan who's now in the church. Why might they be concerned?
Because of appearances. They want to help, They don't want to cause anyone else to sin.
Sure. Well, and this was my old life, right? Mm-hmm. This is what I used to do. We used to eat meat off idols. That was part of what we did. But I am now a Christian, and I don't do that anymore, right? I've been saved from eating meat offered to idols because it's nasty, polluted meat, right? So for them, it becomes a big issue. I mean, we could look in our own contacts, things that would be comparable to that. which there are issues that are comparable to that. We just don't happen to deal with this one, the meat offered idol stuff, which almost makes it easier to look at, for us to look at, because it's not an issue we face at all. Okay, so this seems to be a big deal. Before he even starts explaining, and trust me, the fact that we spent so much time on this marriage doesn't mean we're going to spend the next 2 hours on meat offered idols. So don't worry. Because where does he start this? Because if Paul was focused on law, if his focus was on law, what could he say? How could Paul deal with this issue of meat sacrificed to idols? How could he deal with it in a heartbeat?
You just say, don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. God said don't do it. Good night. In Acts, it says that the Christian church said don't do it. Boy, don't do it. God said that it's wrong. Next.
Uh-huh.
But if he does that, then we're not free from the law. We just have a new set of laws we got to follow, right? So we're not free from anything. So we can't do that. So where does he start talking about this meat offered to idols? What does he focus on first? And you almost look at it and say, geez, this is kind of odd.
Yeah, he starts with knowledge.
Yeah,
love.
he starts with knowledge and love. Now, what the heck does knowledge and love have to do with meat offered to idols, right? And what does he say about knowledge and love?
Knowledge puffs up while love builds up.
Okay. Now, based on knowledge puffs up, what does that mean?
We have a lot of puffed up people.
Makes you think you're smarter.
Okay. Yeah. Knowledge creates people who think they're much smarter than they actually are. Knowledge puffs up. Even in a positive, I don't want to say positive. What does knowledge do to us? I mean, it can lead us to be arrogant and, self-absorbed. But what else does it do?
It teaches us and informs us.
It teaches us, it informs us, it focuses internally, right? Mm-hmm. It focuses on what we know. So the more I know, the better off I am, right? Because I know more, right? So it builds who up?
Me.
It puffs me up, right? What about love? What's the contrast with love? What does love do?
It builds other people.
It builds other people up. Love is something that builds others. Knowledge puffs me up. Love builds up others. Now this is so we got to keep that in mind, because everything he says in these 2 chapters is really grounded in that. The difference. So if you look at that, which is better? Which of the 2 should be a higher priority for Christians?
Love.
Love might be a higher priority. I don't think he says knowledge is bad. We should be stupid. But love is something we should seek out because it builds us. Now, we're going to go back to the meat offered idols. So he introduces this. What does he say about this business with meat offered idols?
There are really no idols.
Okay, he's going to start. There's no real idols. Why are there no really?
Because there's only one God.
There's only one God. Therefore, if I've got an idol, a statue of Zeus, right? Is Zeus a god? No, Zeus doesn't exist. Therefore, the idol is what?
Void.
Yeah, void. The idol is a statue, right? Does the idol have power? No. If meat is offered to Zeus and Zeus doesn't exist, is the meat tainted?
No.
Heck no. What is it?
Meat.
Meat, right? That's all it is. Now, and it's really fascinating. What word does he use? He says, this I know. We know this. We know there's no gods, right? We know there's no gods. Therefore, idols have no power. Therefore, meat offered to idols is what? Meat, right?
Edible too.
Right. Because we know what about God?
There's only one.
There's only one. And that God is Father, Son.
Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's the God. The other gods we know don't exist. But remember, although knowing that's important, what's more important than just knowing?
Following.
Loving, right? Because he introduces this. Knowledge puffs up, right? And this we know, but love
It builds up.
builds up. Love builds up. Now, but we know this, right? Now, before he even talks about love, and he will, I know this stuff. Does everybody know? I don't know. We know it, right? We all know those gods don't exist. None of us are pagans here. We recognize there's only one God, and if there's only one God, then these other things can't be gods, right? And we know that. Does everybody know that? No, not everybody knows that. And so what does he say about those who don't know that? Who don't know that these other gods don't exist, that there's only one God?
They still think food is eat,
Yeah, they don't know.
being weak and defiled.
They don't know that these gods don't exist, right? Now, who's he talking about? The people who don't know this. He's not talking about people who are outside the church. He's talking about people inside the church that aren't so sure they know that. Mm-hmm. Right? So when they eat meat offered to idols, what happens to them?
Nothing.
Well, nothing actually happens. We know that, right? But they don't know that.
They're afraid.
They're afraid, right? Why are they so afraid?
Because they don't know really what is going to happen.
They don't know what will happen. Because they don't know that God to which that meat was offered doesn't exist, right? And so since they don't know that and they're afraid, and I say to that person, oh, go ahead and eat that steak. That steak's good meat. Well, I don't know, it's offered to idols. Go ahead, it'll be fine. Okay, and you take a bite, what happens to them?
Nothing.
Well, we know nothing spiritually, but in their mind, what happens to them? What do they think happens to
They're
them?
eating tainted meat.
They're eating tainted meat. Therefore, what do they think is happening to them?
They're sinning against Christ.
They're sinning against God. They're doing something that is wrong, right? They're doing something that is wrong.
Okay.
And he even says their consciences are defiled because they feel as though they've done something wrong. So they feel guilty. It becomes a barrier between themselves and God. Now, what does Paul how does he identify these people? Which is really kind of interesting. So these people don't want to eat meat offered to idols, right? Because they believe idols have real power and meat offered to them is defiled and dirty. And if they eat it, they're going to become defiled. How does Paul describe them?
Weak.
Weak! That those people are weak. But when he says they're weak, does he say weak like in, oh, they're worthless? No. It's almost weak like a child is weak, right? Therefore, what? And it's the same thing he said about marriage. What does he say about these folks who don't know what we know?
He says if it would cause them to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again. So
Okay.
I will not cause them to fall.
Okay, because if they eat meat, they're going to feel as though they're slipping away. So do you think Paul would say to those weak Christians, oh yeah, you just got to hold your nose and eat it. It won't happen. Would he say that to them?
No.
No, of course not. Why wouldn't he say that? Because it's going to hurt them, right? It's going to damage their faith. And in fact, as he looks at himself, because he's free, right? He can eat that because he knows,
It's not gonna
right? But what does he choose to do?
Not eat
He chooses not to eat with them,
with them.
right? Because by eating with them, what happens?
Then he's the same as them.
He makes them feel,
It may
Bad.
hurt them. It may hurt them if he does it, right? Now remember, he started contrast between knowledge and love, right? Paul knows he can eat this, but he's choosing not to for the sake of the other. He even says, but take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. You are free. You're free. Don't use your freedom. What? How would you complete that? You are free. Don't use your freedom to
hurt others.
hurt others. Don't use your freedom that you know to hurt others. And the others aren't the ones that are superior. They're not the ones that have this deeper spiritual knowledge. They don't. They're weak. But what do you do for somebody who's weak? If your focus is love and love builds up, what do you do for weak people?
You love them anyway.
You love them and
Build them up.
you build them up.
Sorry.
You want them to become stronger, don't you? You know, you don't say you don't want them to remain weak. You want to build them up, right? But you recognize that they just may not be ready to do everything now. You got to build them up. Okay. Now I think that's really cool. So the issue is no longer just eating meat offered to idols. It's what's more important, the knowledge that you have or the love you can show. Now, at the beginning of the next chapter, chapter 9, I'm going to tell you, he goes, I think this is he's off and running, you know, and he does that for what, 14 verses. What's going on in those 14 verses? And when I read that, I thought, and even looked at old notes I'd taken, and I had all kinds of detailed notes on it. What's he doing in those 14 verses?
He's talking about himself.
He's talking about himself, right? And what's the structure? What does he use over and over and over in those 14 verses? In essence, what are those 14 verses?
About being an apostle.
He talks about being apostle. What grammatical form does he use? What kind of sentences does he's questions? It's a whole bunch of questions, right? He's asking questions. Now, I think that's kind of interesting, right? Now, what is his point in those 14? Because he asks, 14 questions in those verses. What's the point? And how does what he just said, how would it cause him to write this? Because then he's going to go back to meat offered to idols later. Therefore, it's got to be related. What is he doing in this? These little four. That if we looked at each of them individually, we are going to go nuts. It's like reading, the descendants of Jesus, the family of Joseph, all those names. You say, geez, I'm ready to go. What does he do? Why does he feel he needs to do that? These 14 verses. He's talking about himself. What's he saying about himself? What's his point in all this stuff he says here?
He keeps saying, I'm a free man.
I am a free man. So good. Outstanding, Judy. Then what's the point? You're right, he goes constantly back to, am I not free? Don't I have a right? You know, I'm a free, I have a right. Don't I have a right for this? Don't we have a right to this? What's his point?
That he's doing what he chooses to do.
Okay, why is he doing what he chooses to do?
Because God calls him.
Because, yeah, God's called him, but he's free to do
He's
it.
free to do it.
You know, doesn't a worker have a right to his wages? Geez, where's this coming from? This is all a question of, he's established, he's talked about this knowledge and love. I think what he's trying to do is, remember, and knowledge puffs up. He's going into his freedom, that this is what he's free to do. He's free to make a wage. He's free to get paid. He's free to do this. He has a right to it. All of that's fine. So he's not compromising his freedom by suggesting that if I'm with a brother who feels that eating meat offered to idols is going to taint him, I shouldn't do it. This isn't a new law. He's free to do all of this stuff. It's not compromising his freedom. And I think he spent 14 verses explaining that. And I really think that's all he's doing in those 14 verses. Is that he as an individual, even though he's choosing to do that, he would be free not to. If he didn't, that's okay. But then knowledge puffs up. That would be a focus on himself. Love builds up. Any observations about like I said, we could go through those individual questions, but I don't think I don't think they do anything other than establish that he has a right.
I think it just shows that he loves God freely.
Absolutely. You said that much better than I did. You did. You said it much better. That he loves God freely. That he loves God freely. And everything in here is right. Which is amazing. Everything in here is right. What becomes truly amazing, given all of this, is then what he says in verse 15. I have a right to do all of this. I love God, and none of this compromises my love of God. And by gum, I know it. And then what does he say in verse 15?
But I made no use of any of these.
But I'm not going to use it. I have a right to all of this. I have a right. I have a Christian right for all of this. But you know what? I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to use the rights that I have. And in this context, the right is back eating meat offered to idols. But this is bigger now. I have a right to do all of these because I'm free. And I know it. But I'm choosing what? Not to. In fact, what does he, as he continues this argument still in verse 15, in fact,
Rather die.
Yeah.
I would rather die than do this, because all of this, these rights that I have, all that's going to do is what? Going to give me something to boast about. It's going to puff me up. All of this I know. Everything I said I know. And I'm right. But I'm choosing not to do it. Why am I choosing not to do it? What is my job?
He's compelled to preach.
My job is to preach the gospel. That's my job. And preaching the gospel, what? Doesn't involve boasting. It doesn't involve rights. It doesn't involve celebrating freedoms that I personally have. Why do I do it then?
To spread the love of Jesus.
What does he say in verse 17?
If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward.
Right? But
If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me.
so why is he doing it? Is he doing it to get a reward? Which he's already said he has every right to get. I mean, he's spent 14 verses on, I have a right to everything I have. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because
I'm free.
I'm free.
I want to.
That's right. I want to, and I've been called to do it. It is a commission that's been given to me. It's not to get a reward. It's to do what I'm been called to do. Now, we may have a little problem because Paul anticipates questions. You know, somebody's going to say, well, that means you get no reward at all, right? So Paul, of course, asks in verse 18, what is my reward? Because somebody's going to ask, and you're doing it, you're going to get nothing out of it. What does Paul get from what he's done?
Satisfaction.
He gets a satisfaction. He knows he's doing what he's been called to do. And in fact, what has that led him to do? I have these rights, and I am using these rights to proclaim the gospel. I'm choosing to sacrifice all that I have, I'm entitled to proclaim the gospel. Right? Mm-hmm. And why am I doing it?
Because I'm free.
I am free with respect to all, and because I'm free, what have I chosen to do?
Preach the gospel.
I have chosen to do something really radical, right? Because I'm free, I've chosen to become what?
Make myself a slave
I
to
am-
everyone.
I am free to make myself a slave. Do I have to do it? No. Do I have the right to do something else?
Yes.
Yes.
You're darn right. I have the right to do something else. But I am choosing to use the freedom that I have to become a slave to others. And why am I becoming a slave to others?
To win them
To win them for Christ. I am becoming a slave in order to win them. I've got a job to do. And he calls it a commission, right? This is his commission. And I think that's part of the reason why he's so leery to pound on why he won't go back to law. Because if it's law, then you're getting something from obeying the law. You're getting some kind of reward for following the law. But this isn't, he's free. Only a free person can choose to give it up. If I got the law, I'm not choosing it. When I was in Montana, the speed limit in Montana on the long country roads was reasonable and prudent. Reasonable and prudent. Now that sounds like there's no law. It's horrible. It's a horrible thing because it means a policeman determines the law. And he can pull you over. If he thinks you're not being reasonable and prudent, he can pull you and ticket you. And they will. But reasonable and prudent, which means you have to determine, right? Okay. What Paul is saying here, only a person who is free can choose to give up that freedom. Only a person that's free can choose to be a slave. Slaves don't choose to be. You're a slave because you're a slave. But he's free, therefore he's choosing to be like a slave. in order to accomplish this purpose. Now remember, we're back to this meat offered to idols. And now what he said about, if I'm with somebody that's a weak Christian who may be damaged by eating meat, do I have a right to eat it? Yeah, I have a right to eat it.
Right, yeah.
But I'm choosing not to for the sake of the other. And in fact, he kind of summarized, yes.
Okay, so I had to look up the difference between commissions and rewards just to help me. So it says, essentially, all commissions are a form of financial reward, but not all rewards are commissions. Commissions tell an employee you will make a portion of what you bring in, while rewards say you hit a specific goal. Here is an acknowledgement of your success.
Okay.
So help me from there.
Well, when he says, he says, he's using commissions in a different way, I think. When he's talking, he's saying that God has commissioned him. He's not receiving a commission. But God has, in other words, God has assigned him a job to do. He's doing this because God has told him to do it. That's why he's doing this.
Okay.
He's got the right not to do it if he doesn't want to. And he's still accomplishing something. In fact, he can earn what he deserves what he can get. But he's choosing to give that up because God has given him a job where if he claims this reward, his job is going to be compromised. Because it means acting on his freedom. He's freely choosing to give up his freedom. And you can only do that when you're free. You can't do that if you're bound. Because you're just doing what you're told to do. And in fact, he kind of summarizes it. This little issue of meat offered to idols, he's created something much bigger, right? And he even just says that it's bigger, beginning in verse 20. What does he say about himself?
He becomes a Jew to win the Jews.
Does he have the right not to be a Jew?
Yes.
Yes, he does. He has a right to. But what has he freely chosen to do? To be a Jew. Why?
To win them.
To win the Jews. What else does he say?
To those under the law, he became like one under the law. To win those under the law.
Is he free from the law?
Yes.
You betcha he is. Is he free to do whatever to violate that? Of course, he's free to it. He has a right to that. But he's given that right up for something more important, and that's to win those. Now, he's going to now take the other side. What's on the other side? So he becomes a Jew under the law in order to win Jews under the law. What's on the other side of that?
Gentiles.
Yeah. What about people who are outside of the law? When he's with Gentiles, does he say, "Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm a Jew. I can't be with you." How does he act? How does he respond when he's with Gentiles?
Like them so that he can win them.
So he can win them. Now Paul, for crying out loud, he's pretty strong, right? When he's with people who are weak,
He becomes weak.
he becomes weak. Why does he become weak?
He does things to win all men.
He does what is necessary to win them. So from this one little issue about meat offered to idols, what has Paul done? What has Paul done for us? Starting with this very specific meat offered to idols. What has he taught us? What has he taught the Corinthians?
All that comes to mind is do as I say, not as I do.
Well, let's build on that. What would Paul say is the most important thing for Christians to do?
Love.
Most important thing for Christians to do is to love, right? That's the bottom line. Does knowledge help them love? Yeah. No, he doesn't say knowledge is wicked, bad. Knowledge is fine. He knows a lot. Knowledge is good. But the goal is to love. And what does love do?
Build.
Love always builds up. So as Christians, whether you're talking about meat offered to idols, whether you're talking about marriage, regardless of what you're talking about, with respect to laws, but you were saying earlier about with marriage laws, what does Paul say is most important?
God's law.
What is most important for us?
Love.
And how does love show itself in what Paul is saying? For him, at least for him. And I don't know that he would say this is for everybody. I think the principle is the same, but I don't think Paul's job, remember, Paul sees his job as doing what? He's already said it.
That Christians, spread the word.
To spread the word. His job is to plant the seed, right? His job is to build the foundation. That's what he's already said. That's my job. And even though I have all these rights, I'm going to give those rights up in order to what?
Bring it to God.
Yeah, do the job I've been called to do. Doesn't mean we all have the same job. In fact, in chapter 12, he's going to talk about different jobs in the church. And we're not all out there scattering seeds, building foundations. He'd even say, I think Apollos didn't build the foundation. What did Apollos do?
Water.
He watered. He built the walls. He didn't build the foundation. That was his job. And he was free to do it. But even in doing that, you sacrifice that freedom for the sake of others. That love becomes, for him, love, if he's going to lay a foundation, he's got to love the people he's talking to. In fact, he's got to identify with them. And and now I'm kind of thinking, in the Galatian letter, remember, and I don't know if we looked at the letter to the Galatians. He and Peter get into a big argument in the second chapter of the Galatian letter. You remember what the argument was between he and Peter?
Yeah.
He chews Peter out. He chews Peter out.
Circumcision.
Peter, he's in this church, Antioch, I think it's the church in Antioch. They're together, and it's a Gentile church, and they're having a great time. And Peter and Paul are eating with Gentiles because they are free to do it, right? They have the right to do it. Eating with Gentiles. Everybody is happy. People from Jerusalem, Christians from Jerusalem come down to Antioch, Jewish Christians. What does Peter do?
He follows the law.
He stops eating with the Gentiles. He stops eating with the Gentiles. And he goes to eat with the Jews.
They got better food.
Kosher. It really is kosher. He goes and eats with the Gentiles. Now, seems insignificant, right?
Bless you.
Seems like a small thing. Did Peter have the right to do that? Darn tootin' he did. He had the right to do that. He's free. He can eat with whoever he wants. Why then did Paul chew him out?
Because when he did that, then he was not setting or helping the Gentiles out.
He wasn't helping the
He
Gentiles.
wasn't sharing the gospel, the love.
He wasn't showing
Gentiles.
love. Acting on his knowledge wasn't showing love. And for Paul, that becomes the key. And that's what he's talking about here. When you get right down to it, it's not the issue isn't whether you should eat meat offered to idols. That doesn't matter. Because they don't exist anyway. So who cares? The issue is, are you showing love to the people around you? So should you eat meat offered to idols?
No.
Depends. Depends. It really depends. The goal is to show love to others. Now, that's kind of radical, and I like this because it's something that I can apply. You know, it's not that I have to look and find what I have to do, but rather, what can I do to help the people around me? Do what God has commissioned me to do, which I think is different than what Paul was commissioned to do. So how has God commissioned each of us? What life has he given us to do? And how can we do it in a way that builds other people up? To me, that becomes exciting and applicable. And I think we'd have gotten lost if we looked at all those questions that he asks. I think. Okay, any questions about? Okay, next week we're going to look at chapter 9, verses 24 through 11. And just the first verse of 11. And, you know, the Corinthian church is a unique place. They got a lot of stuff going on in the Corinthian church. So we're going to look at some other some specific issues that Paul's going to address. But in each of those times, he's going to do the same thing he does here. He's going to broaden the application. So it's something that is bigger than just the limited situation they're in. Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. Remind us that although we are free and we have all kinds of rights, and that's good. That's good. Remind us that because we're free to give up some of those rights for the sake of our brothers and sisters, particularly those who may be struggling or don't fully understand. Help us to use our rights to enable them to grow and become the men and women God created them to be. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Yeah.
Elaine wanted me to tell everyone that she misses them.
Well, we miss her.
They'll be back from Connecticut, I think Sunday.
Oh.
Yeah, the house is not completely done, but it's close. But they had to go back up to Connecticut to do
Did they
some
both
things.
go back?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Because last time he stayed, didn't he?
He did,
Yeah.
and he doesn't do real well by himself, taking care of himself. And she came to help him, and he went back with her.
Well, good. That's probably a good
So
thing.
it is a good thing, because Ron does not remember to take medication that he needs to take twice a day, and just different things.
Yeah.
And he's a little younger, but you need to help.
Family trait.
It's a job. Yes.
Are you
yes.
suggesting genetics?
They
involved?
have,
Are you sure it's family or male trait?
well, you
Could be
think,
male too.
now we're gonna pick on
Wait a
Pastor.
minute.
Yeah, I knew.
Wait.
Look out, what's going on? I started something.
Bus was that way too.
When Ron drove truck, I would say, did you take your medicine? He didn't have that much then, thank goodness. But he came home from driving truck from, I don't remember what month, but in November, he was in Du Bois getting stents in his heart.